Hi everyone, this is Brian Neher. I am just joining you today with a live Q&A session. I've had a lot of questions over the past few weeks and just thought I'd go ahead and try to answer some of those right here on Facebook, and that's one of the reasons for doing this. So this is my first time doing a live Q&A, so if we have any technical difficulties, just let me know. I actually have my wife Jackie here in the studio helping me out. Jackie, why don't you come over and say hi? And she will be...
Hi, everybody.
Isn't she beautiful? Anyhow, she will be kind of fielding questions for me and letting me know if there's any technical difficulties along the way. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and start posting them at the bottom, and I will get to as many as I can throughout this painting session or throughout this Q&A session. But first of all, I want to thank you guys so much for all of your support here on Facebook. You guys have been tremendous, and I'm so glad that you enjoy the postings that I do every day on Facebook, the Painters of the Past. And I hope that they will inspire you as much as they've inspired me over the years. And just really want to thank you guys so much, and also thank you for posting your questions the other day when I had originally posted that I would be doing a live Q&A. I asked for any questions beforehand to see if I could answer some of those, and so I have a list of those right here, quite a few, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to get to all of them, but we'll definitely work some of those in today. So if you have any questions, just let me know. But to go ahead and get started, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian Neher, and I am a professional portrait painter. I paint commission portraits for both private and corporate commissions. And I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's where I'm broadcasting live from Charlotte here in my studio. And I pretty much spend all of my days and all my time here in the studio. So it's always good to get in touch with other artists and be able to talk with them as well. And so that's another reason that I wanted to do this, to be able to share ideas and get information from you guys as well, and to give out as much information as I can. One thing that I've learned over the years is that there are no secrets in art. And if someone tells you that there are, they're not telling you the truth. So that's one thing that I've learned over the years, that there are no secrets in anything that you want to learn about art. We are very fortunate to live in this time today because of the internet. We have instant access to much of the information that could have only been dreamed of by artists of the past. So just want to let you know that, and go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and I've got a list of questions here that I'm going to, I'll start out with a couple of those, and then if you guys have questions along the way, I will try to answer those as well. But the first question, let's see. First question comes from Fran Chuba. And she says, "Thank you so much, Fran, for the kind comment. It's greatly appreciated." And her question is, "My struggle is keeping very young children childlike. It's so easy to age them with too much detail." When it comes to painting portraits, I will let you know, in my own experience, that painting children are probably the hardest subject out of all the subjects that you can have. When it comes to portraits, children are much tougher to paint than adults, and the reason is because everything is so subtle. The way the structure, the bone structure on a child is very subtle, so which means that the light falling on the face, the transitions between one value to another and from light to dark is very subtle. And you can't really overemphasize maybe the wrinkles or the creases in the face on a child, because if you do, it instantly ages them very quickly. And so the name of the game when it comes to painting portraits of children is subtle, I would say. And so it takes a lot longer to get that soft transition in the face when it comes to a child. And don't overemphasize those features, or even the change from the value change from light to dark. That is more of a gradual soft transition. If you make that too harsh, going from a very light value to a very dark value, it can age them very quickly as well. Now with a man's portrait, you can get away with a lot. A man's portrait's different because those harsh transitions between values can sometimes make them look more masculine. But when it comes to children's portraits, even women's portraits, I tend to paint them a little more on the subtle side, just for the fact that it lends itself more towards the look and feel that I'm after. So that was a great question, Fran. Let's see, I've got another one here. This one's from Karen Murphy. Hey Karen, how's it going? Thank you so much for sending me your message. It says, I have questions on canvases. Do you stretch your own linen canvases, or do you buy them at, say, Hobby Lobby? I used to buy them pre-stretched, meaning that they were already stretched at the very beginning, but right now, for the past 15 years or so, I've pretty much stretched my own canvas. And what I mean by stretching canvas, I've got a stretcher bar here. You can buy stretcher bars at any art supply store. I order mine a lot of times online from places like Jerry's Artorama.com, or even Cheap Joe's Art Supply Company online. And I usually buy them in bulk. So I might get a pack of 25 or 50 of a certain size. So with this is a 12-inch strip, and this is a 9-inch strip. So you buy separate strips and then go ahead and put them together like a square here. And then I cut the canvas out and stretch it over top of the stretcher bars themselves. I've actually put together a video on how to do this on my website at brianneher.com as well. I did a video with Cheap Joe's Art Supplies, and one of the videos that they wanted to do was a demonstration on how to stretch canvases. So great question. Thank you so much. I am looking down here. It says, this one's from, if I mess up your name or I mispronounce it, I apologize, but I'll do my best. Servando Velasquez. It says, do you ever have problems with the ambient lighting in your studio? Does it affect the way that you see color? Great question. As far as the lighting goes in my studio, the lights that I have on me right now are not the typical lights that I use for when I'm painting. These are more for the camera and being able to have for you guys to be able to see me a little bit better. But as far as painting goes, the lights that I use are the long fluorescent bulbs. I believe they're 44 or 48-inch bulbs, and I have about 15 or 16 of those bulbs just attached to the ceiling of my studio here. And the important thing about the lighting that you use is having the correct temperature. So I usually like around between 55 and 5500 Kelvin is how they rate the lighting, the light bulbs themselves. And what the 5500 Kelvin represents is it kind of simulates natural daylight outside. And so more like north light, I would say. And so if I know that as I'm painting, if the painting looks good underneath that type of lighting, then it should look good under any other type of lighting. And so as far as ambient light, it doesn't really bother me because most of the light is coming down from above, and it's pretty consistent. And that's one reason why I have so many light bulbs in my studio, because if you have a rainy day, or if you're totally relying on painting with natural daylight, sometimes if you have a cloudy day or a rainy day outside and it's dark, it really cuts down on the amount of light that gets into your studio, which can really affect the way that you see colors and values. So having all the lights up there, it just provides a consistent daylight or simulates daylight whenever I need it to. So I'm going to go look down here at another question that I've gotten. Let's see here. I have one here. It says this one's from Elaine Walker. Hey Elaine, how's it going? Thank you so much for taking the time to post your question. It says, let's see. Oh, I missed it. It says, my problem is getting a true likeness. Any suggestions? When it comes to portrait painting, getting a likeness is, it's more than just getting the correct drawing of the features. A lot of times artists are under the impression that if I can get those features painted, the exact drawing of those features, then I'll automatically get a likeness of that person. And that's not always the case. A lot of times it's the overall gesture of the person, the way they stand, the way they sit, the way they hold their head. They might tilt it left or right. the way they present themselves. It's sort of the whole package together. And that's one of the reasons why I like to meet people beforehand. Before actually painting any portraits, I like to meet the people that I'm going to be painting, so I can get a good feel for their personality and their character. And after talking to them for about 15 or 20 minutes, it's really that first impression that I get of someone that I'm trying to put on canvas. And so in order to get a likeness of that person, a lot of times I'm trying to remember that first impression. So as I'm painting, as I'm looking at the photo references that I'm using, a lot of times there are going to be certain areas, maybe in the head, that I'm downplaying a little bit. In other words, I'm not going to paint them in as fully detailed as they are in the photograph. And then there are other things that I'm going to emphasize, maybe exaggerate a little bit more. And so it's that exaggeration of some areas and downplaying of other areas to help bring out that initial character and personality that I first saw in someone. And so that all plays into getting a likeness of someone. Really, when it comes to likeness, I am kind of under the same mindset as some of those painters of the past, like John Singer Sargent. It was, he always wanted to get those large shapes before he even put in any features of the face. So really getting those large shapes with those large value relationships and the correct drawing of those big shapes really produces more of a likeness of someone than actually trying to paint so much detail into each feature. So I hope that helps as well. Servando, I'm just looking down. Thank you, Brian. You're definitely welcome. All right, I've got, let's see, I've got another question down here as well. This one's, you have to excuse me forgive me on the pronunciation. Sayanti Chaduri is what I'm guessing. They say, do you do an underpainting, and how do you do it? Which colors do you use? How much detail do you put in? And also, when drawing, what is the difference between adult and children eyes and the nose and mouth? Well, let me go ahead and tackle the first question first, is do you do an underpainting? I do a very minimal drawing at the beginning. It's not a full-blown, what artists would consider an underpainting, meaning that I would do an entire head in different values, in full value, using just one color, basically, more of a monochromatic painting. I don't do that. I pretty much start out and I'll measure where the head's going to be on the canvas, and then I'll mark off the general idea of where the head is going to be, and then measure out how far the distance is between the different features of the face, and then just go ahead and start painting right away. Start blocking in the painting using solid paint. And what I mean by solid paint is that it's not thinned down. So I go in there, especially with the head, I'll go in there and start blocking in certain areas, and then after I get it all blocked in, then I'll go back and start to blend those areas in order to soften transitions between colors or values, and to also start to correct the drawing as I go along. But I try to get even that initial drawing that I do beforehand, I try to get as accurate as I can, because I know that if I don't get that accurate at the beginning, I'm going to struggle the rest of the time throughout the rest of the painting process. And that's really one thing that I learned early on in my career, is that I used to start out in more of a sketchy manner. So I would start out and approximate where things were going to go, and then just have the mindset that later on in the painting, eventually things would start to come together magically and the painting would turn out the way that I wanted to. And that's not what happens, because if you don't get, especially the drawing, correct in the beginning, or have some sort of a firm structure to start out with in the beginning, at some point during the painting, you're going to have to come back and correct it. So it's better just to get it, spend the few extra minutes or even 15, 20 minutes at the beginning of a painting. It'll save you a lot of time in the end. So I hope that answers your question about structure. I see my wife Jackie. She's getting my attention. Yes.
Yes, Kathy Schubert has a question. She wrote backlit subjects.
Okay, so Kathy, thank you so much. She has a question about backlit subjects. That's a great question. It is it's what the French called or referred to as contre-jour, and basically it means against the light or against day. And what it is, I do it a lot of times in my paintings, especially with portraits of children and portraits of women. I'll have the light coming from behind rather than from, say, the side, where you get a nice distinct light and shadow pattern that happens on the face. Instead, I'll light them either from behind or slightly above and behind. And what happens is it creates a sort of a halo effect around the head, and it actually helps to really showcase and emphasize the head. And a lot of times I'll do that. I'll do that with outdoor portraits. I don't do that with indoor portraits because just because of the amount of you lose a lot of detail when you do an indoor portrait, because there's not a lot of light that's showing on the face itself. Whereas outdoors, even though you're having a backlit situation where the sun might be behind the figure, you still have light shining on the face from the blue of the sky. So the backlit situation, I do that quite often, especially with children and women, because it's a very soft light. In other words, if I were to shine a light, say, from the side here onto me, the shadows that it produces might be too harsh for a woman's portrait or even a child's portrait. And so the backlighting situation tends to soften that quite a bit. But I will tell you this, that backlit situation is, in my opinion, the most difficult lighting situation to paint. And the reason is because, for a couple of different reasons. One, I had mentioned you don't get the distinct light and shadow pattern that falls on the face, and we as artists, we tend to like that pattern that we can follow. So if we see a shadow on someone's face, we can just kind of follow that line all the way down, and it works well. But when you take away that contrast and value, a lot of times artists tend to get lost because they don't know what to do. Because what do you do if you can't change the value in order to create form, or in order to get that three-dimensional look? Well, you have to go, instead of going from a value change from light to dark, you then have to go from a color change or a change in temperature, maybe from warm to cool, but they're still similar in value. So the backlighting situation is more difficult to do, but it's definitely a flattering light for your subject, and one that I prefer most often, especially for children's portraits. I see my wife Jackie asking me another question here.
Yeah, it looks like as people post questions, I kind of lose the questions that were first. So I'm not quite sure why it's doing that. But anyways, I know Fran had a question about children's portraiture. Did you kind of already touch on that a little bit?
A little bit, yes. I see it right here. Fran, hey, how's it going? It says, she says, the challenges of, please comment on the challenges of children's portraiture. Again, one of the challenges I had mentioned a little bit earlier was the subtlety, the subtlety of being able to go from one value to another. Even the way that you put the paint on the canvas when painting a child's portrait. I had a question the other day as well that said, I don't see any brushstrokes in your painting. Why don't I see any brushstrokes? One reason is because of the nature of the subject, which is a child. Either a child's portrait or a woman's portrait, making it look more feminine or making it look more youthful. Those subtle transitions, it really doesn't lend itself as much to building up of the paint in the face. And also, if I were to lay the paint on very heavily on a child's portrait, what happens is it also ages them much quicker. In other words, they tend to look older than they actually are. And for most clients that are commissioning me to paint a portrait, they're not looking for a very harsh, painterly buildup of paint on a child's face. They want that soft look, and that's really the reason why I do that. Another reason why you don't see any brushstrokes is probably the way that I'm painting. I have been studying under another artist named Joe Bowler from Hilton Head, South Carolina, for the past 20 years, and a lot of what he has taught me over the years has really worked its way into my painting. So a lot of times I'm using my fingers to push the paint around. I'm not using a brush many times as I'm working on the transitions of in the flesh tones on a head in a portrait. So a lot of times I might block in or lay down paint side by side and get it all blocked in, and then I might go back and actually take my finger, usually my pinkies, and I'll take it and just do a zigzag motion and sort of blend that way. I'll use my thumbs. In other words, I do a lot of finger painting, and as a result, you don't get those distinct brush strokes a lot of times. But then I try to balance out that that soft transition and those soft transitions inside the face with more painterly strokes somewhere else. It might be in the hair, it might be in the background, it might be in the clothes, which helps to create balance throughout the painting. Because if everything was painted to that soft transition degree, it tends to get a little monotonous, and it actually tends to weaken the portrait a little bit. So having a balance between those soft transitions and hard transitions, as well as more of a painterly brushstrokes and less painterly brushstrokes, tends to help out in the portrait. So I hope that helps, Fran. Yes, Jack.
Okay, Diane Reeves had a question, which again it fell below. I don't know.
Diane Reeves, yes, I've got it right here.
Okay.
Diane, thank you so much for your question. It says, please explain which brushes you use for each stage or purpose. Also, do you use any medium? If so, which one, why, and at which stages? Great questions. Let's see, the brushes that I use. Well, let me see. A lot of times I will start out with bristle brushes, which are basically brushes that look like this, and they work good for blocking in a painting, being able to lay down a lot of paint very quickly, just for the fact that they are stiffer, and they can take a little more abuse at the beginning stages. Then after I get the painting blocked in, a lot of times I will also take a paper towel and I'll push that paint around with the paper towel during the block-in stage. And then let me grab my other ones here. And then I'll take, once I've blocked in the painting, then I'll go ahead and take a, this is an Ebony Splendor brush. I use a variety of brushes, but this is just one example. This is actually it's not a natural bristle brush, but it's a man-made, what is it? A man-made bristle itself. So it's a very soft bristle, and I'll just take that and start blending colors together a lot of times with the brushes. But even before I get to this stage, as far as blending with the brush, a lot of times I'm taking my fingers and pushing the paint around, because it's really those large shapes that I'm interested in at the beginning stages that really tell the story. It's those large shapes that tell the story, and that's really what I'm trying to get down at the beginning. And as far as finishing a painting, it's pretty much these type of brushes, along with they just come in smaller versions. So I'm just moving from a bigger brush down to a smaller brush, and that's pretty much it. And then finishing up with your very smallest brushes, like in the highlights and things like that. So I don't use just one brush manufacturer, but there are some great ones out there. I like, as far as synthetic brushes, which these are, I like to use ruby satin brushes, which is made by Silver Brush. They're great. These brushes work well also. These are made by Creative Mark. They're very inexpensive, and I pretty much go through a brush, one of these brushes, I can go through one and pretty much ruin it in one or two paintings. But even after I've used it quite a bit and I don't get that very sharp chiseled edge, they end up looking like more like this, which looks almost like an unusable brush. For many artists, they would pretty much chuck this and throw it away, but for me, it really helps because I'm able to take these brushes and use them as blending brushes, and they work really well. So I'll use pretty much any brush at all different stages until it pretty much falls off the handle, which I've had happen before as well. So thank you so much, Diane, for the question. Oh, let me get the second part of your question. Do you use any medium, and if so, which one? I don't use any medium. As far as the overall painting process, throughout the painting, I'm using what I refer to as solid paint. In other words, it's paint that has not been thinned down at all. I'm just using it straight out of the tube, and there are a couple of different reasons why I do that. Because solid paint, paint that hasn't been thinned down, is much easier to blend together rather than trying to blend and paint with thin paint. Because with thin paint, it goes on beautifully and you get these nice thin washes at the beginning, but you don't have a lot of time to work it. In other words, the more you start to work the thin paint, the more you start to remove paint from the canvas rather than laying it down. So when blending, especially in the skin tones, I always like to, in order to get that soft transition, I like to use my fingers. And if I were to try to do that with thin paint, just by moving my fingers around and then lifting up off of the canvas, what happens is I pretty much remove all of the paint, and it doesn't give me the result that I'm looking for. Whereas if I use solid paint, I can put down different values, different gradations or different value relationships, going from lighter values to darker values, and then just go back and blend those in afterwards with my finger. And I find that works pretty well. I will mention one thing about blending. Someone had also asked me about how do you avoid over blending. It's very easy to do that, especially with oil paint, because it's so easy to do. So when you put the colors down, you find out very quickly that you're able to get these very smooth, soft transitions. But the danger is that you end up blending your colors a little too soon. And that's why I always talk about during the block-in stage. In other words, you get all of the general values and the overall general color and drawing structure, everything kind of down there before you really start getting into all that blending. And so try not to, my advice I guess would be to avoid over blending at the beginning stages, because what you end up with is losing your drawing altogether, and it's just sort of a fog look, and you'll have to go back and redraw certain areas. So I hope that helps. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit more.
Susie had a question. I think that was the next one.
Susie, yes. Hey, Susie, how's it going? It says, are all your grays made from complementary colors? The good majority, I would say the majority of them are, yes. Because in order to get a proper gray, it really takes a complementary color. If you don't use a complement, you can get variations of different colors, but it doesn't necessarily gray it down. And what I mean by gray, excuse me, I'm going to put this down real quick. What I mean by grayed down is it's a less saturated version of that color. So in other words, if you had a bright red color and you wanted to gray it down a little bit, in other words, you didn't want it to be quite as vibrant or quite as saturated in color, you want it to be a little more muted. What I would do is take the complement of the red, which is green, and you got to take the same value though, the same value green and as the red is, and you mix those together. And if you gradually mix those together, what you'll start to do is you'll take away that brilliance of that red, and it'll start to become a little less bright, not as bright. It'll become more muted, I should say. And that's what I refer to as a gray. It's still a red color, but it's not that super bright red. And so, yes, I use complementary colors when graying down. Colors for skin tones, for anything. Even if I was painting a landscape, if you want to gray down the greens, all that green in the landscape, I would introduce reds in there somewhere as well. Now the reason complementary colors are so important I brought my color wheel with me today because I figured I'd be talking about this. I've got a color wheel here, and this is probably something that most of us have seen in grade school or even an art class coming up. And a lot of times artists forget about this color wheel. And this is so valuable. Joe Bowler, when I first started studying with Joe, he emphasized the color wheel, and he would always tell me that the only thing that he has in his mind as far as a visual picture when he's painting to try to choose the colors that he's mixing is this simple color wheel. So what you have is your basic primary colors. You have yellow, you have blue, and you have red. Those are what they refer to as primary colors. And the reason they're called primary colors is because you don't need any other colors to mix them. In other words, that's how they start out. So I can't get yellow by mixing 2 more colors to get yellower, and I can't get the red by mixing 2 more colors to get red. That's just what they are to start out with. Now from those, you can start mixing those together. So say if I mixed yellow and blue, I would get green here. If I mixed the blue and the red, I would get purple. And the same with the yellow and the red, I would get orange. And what that produces is what artists often refer to as secondary colors. But those secondary colors are also a complement. One of those they're also a complement to one of the primary colors. So in other words, if I started out with blue as the primary here, if you look exactly 180 degrees on the color wheel, directly across from it is orange. And orange is the direct complement to blue. So the reason that a complementary color works and why I would mix orange and blue together to get those grays in the skin tones, if it was more on the if the skin tone was more on the orange side, I would use blue as a mixture, as you had mentioned, to get those grays, is because a complementary color works because it contains equal amounts of the remaining 2 primaries. So in other words, this orange contains an equal amount of red and an equal amount of yellow, and that's the reason why it works with this blue, because it's so different. It's so different than the blue. It doesn't contain anything up here. It contains equal mixtures of the other 2 primaries. But anyhow, that's a long answer as to why I use primaries. But yes, I would say the majority of my grays are mixed by using primary. So great question. Thank you so much.
Go down to Charlotte Ludwig.
All right, Charlotte. Hey, Charlotte, how are you? I've got Charlotte here. It says, do you work the whole painting or one piece at a time? If pieced, how do you keep the composition looking integrated and whole? Good question. Great question, actually. I try to work the whole painting together. In other words, I don't just work on, say when I'm starting out a painting, I might start from an eye and kind of work my way out, but I don't just particularly stick with that one area of the painting. In other words, I might start out with an eye, but then I'll hop over to the ear, and I'll hop over to down to the mouth. And I'm not really thinking about features at that point. What I'm just looking at are values and value relationships. And when I talk about value relationships, I'm simply talking about how one value appears when compared to another value. So as I'm starting out a painting, I use my darkest value. In other words, the darkest value that's going to be in the painting as my reference point to start out with, and then I base all of my other values on that value of that darkest value. So in other words, I'm not necessarily using the darkest value available to me at the time. In other words, I'm not using, say, black straight out of the tube. I might just be using maybe more of a middle value. It registers somewhere on the value scale, somewhere in the middle. But whatever my darkest value is, when I lay that down, I have to determine that I'm not going to go any darker than that value. And so from there, all the rest of my decisions that are based on values, they all refer back to that dark value. In other words, I'm always constantly reminding myself, okay, well, it can't be as dark as this value, so how does it compare to this value as I'm putting it down? So I'm really, that's what I'm looking at as I'm moving across the painting. I'm looking at those values, and that's why I hop around to different areas of the painting at one time, so that it kind of develops as a whole rather than just individual parts. Because really, again, it's the overall, it's the whole picture that's really what matters, and it's really what's going to give you that likeness very quickly, and also give you a sense of form and solidity, I guess I should say, that three-dimensional look by getting those values correct. And so that's one reason why I hop around quite a bit, because I do try to develop everything as a whole. And let's see, the second part of your question is, how do you keep the composition looking integrated and whole if you do it piece by piece? That's another reason why it's just to help to keep it looking as though it is one painting rather than individual pieces. I will tell you this though, because that brings up a really good point. When it comes to painting, you can have some certain areas of a painting that work really well, and they are really great pieces of painting, but when looked at as a whole, in other words, as an entire picture, when you see them as a whole, if they sometimes don't work together. And really, that's the most difficult part of a painting, whether you're painting portraits or whether you're painting still life or landscapes, at least that I've found, is that trying to get everything to work together as a whole unit is sometimes difficult. And so that usually takes some work. So even after you have the drawing, you might have the values, you might have everything correct. It then becomes an editing process at the end where you're sort of you're sort of simplifying, is what I should say. You're simplifying areas in order to get them, to get the entire piece to work together. Now, in order to get the entire painting to work together, that often means that you have to sacrifice some areas of the painting. So in some of those, even in some of the painters that I post every day, in their paintings, maybe the drawing isn't quite there, maybe it suffers a little bit, but it makes up for it in the color. Or maybe I'll post a painting where the color isn't quite, maybe not what it could be fully recognized, but yet the drawing skills and the value relationships are just outstanding. So there are certain things that stand out about a painting in order to get it to work as a whole. And sometimes you have to sacrifice some areas in order to get the whole thing to work together, if that makes sense. But thank you so much. That's a great question.
You can scroll down to, I think it's Nidai. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name.
Can you talk a bit about values? Yes. I don't have my value scale here with me today, but you can look on my website. I'm pretty sure I've posted a value scale. Basically, when I talk about values, I am simply talking about how light or how dark a color is when measured on a scale from black to white. In other words, if I had black here and I had white here and all those grays in between, that represents the limit of values that I have to work with as an artist. And the reason I say that is because you can only go as light as say, white in paint, and you can only go as dark as black in paint. Now, if you were dealing with light itself, light, you could go much lighter, or you can even go much darker out in nature. But when it comes to painting, it's and paint, you're dealing on a very limited scale. So because of that, that limits us as artists in a way, because values are really the only tool, I guess the major tool that we have in order to represent volume or the look of a three-dimensional form on canvas. In other words, you're trying to make things look as though they go around. You're trying to make a head look as though there's parts of it that are closer to you and parts that recede away. In order to do that, value is usually the most effective way to do that. So when I talk about values, we are very limited on a value scale from black to white, which is also, it limits us in one way, but it's also great for us in another, because it's every color that you put on your canvas is going to register somewhere on that value scale. In other words, every color has a value to it, and that's why value and color are inseparable. In other words, every color has a value, so every color that you put on your canvas, not only are you trying to get the correct color, is it more on the green family, is it more in the red family, but you're also trying to get the correct value. Is that how light that color should be? Should it be a little bit darker? So you're also trying to get the correct value and the correct colors. You're putting that on canvas. Now, that's important, because the more you put on your canvas, the more of these brush strokes and the more colors that you put on your canvas, the more values that you're actually putting on your canvas as well. So in order to get everything to work together again as a whole, it's what I refer to as value relationships. In other words, how one value looks when compared to another value. So as you're painting along, always compare those values. I like to use the darkest value on the canvas. It's the easiest, I found, to measure all the other values to. If you try it the opposite way, if you try to measure everything from the lightest value, and you put your lightest value down first, and then you try to work everything around that, what happens is the tendency is to end up with a painting that is very, what they call high keyed in value. In other words, it's very light. And what you'll end up doing a lot of times, you'll find yourself running out of values. In other words, you can't go any lighter than that. And so that's why I find that it's easier just to work from a darker value. And so when I talk about values, that's really what I'm talking about, and how they relate on a value scale. But values are extremely important. I would say drawing, in other words, the expression of form, that's the most important when it comes to representational art, and then values would be the second most important, is what I would say. So hope that answers your question, and I think I've written a couple of blogs on my website as well about value if you wanted to take a look at those as well. But thank you so much. Great question.
Okay, the next question was from Kathy, but would you like me to get you a drink of water?
No, I'm good, thank
Okay,
you.
just checking.
Okay, Kathy, my wife just asked me if I wanted a drink of water. If I sound too raspy, let me know and I'll get one. But Kathy said, and palette choice, are you talking about colors, or are you talking about the actual palette itself? If you're talking about the actual palette itself, I like to use a glass palette. In other words, it's just a piece of 1/4 inch thick glass that you can get from any like Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that. And I like to put a piece of white foam board underneath it just to give it a little more padding, and then to also give it a solid background for mixing colors. And the glass works well because it's so easy to clean up. You can just take a paint scraper. I'll show you my palette right now. You can see it right here. I just basically take a paint scraper, and I will just scrape off the paint at the end of the day, and it makes it real easy. I have a pretty large working area as well. I think a large palette works well because you have more space to mix color, and you're not having to, you don't run out of space as quickly, so you have a lot more paint on your palette that you can use throughout the day without having to constantly clean your palette up. Now, if you're talking about the actual color choices that are on my palette, I just posted those today on the announcement that I made the other day. I posted, someone had asked that question about what colors do you use. I've posted all the colors there if you want to take a look at them. There's about 15 different colors. Then I've also posted a link to a video that I posted on YouTube as well, which shows how you can mix pretty much those same colors just using a very limited palette of colors. You don't necessarily have to have all of those colors. But when choosing a palette, you don't have to have the colors that I use by any means. But what you do need to have, I think, are 3 primaries, the yellow, a blue, and a red, plus white. I think those are extremely important because from those colors you can mix just about any other color that you want. So anyhow, I hope that helps, Kathy, and thank you so much for the question.
Okay, Johnny is next with a question about workshops.
Johnny,
Big question, Johnny.
thank you so much for the question. Do you ever offer workshops or classes? I get a lot of requests for workshops. I honestly just have not had enough time to do a workshop just because of my portrait schedule, and that's really the reason. But maybe sometime in the future I would be able to do that. But I'm just like I said, I pretty much spend all my time here in the studio just working on portraits. So it's sometimes hard for me to think of other projects. And if I was to do a workshop, I'd want to do a pretty in-depth workshop which focuses a lot on portraits and really what artists, if I was an artist attending the workshop, what I would want to see. So definitely a possibility. The classes, the same thing. I don't teach any live classes, but I do have the online class through craftsy.com, which I did about a year ago. It's actually this painting right here is in part of the class, and I do a demonstration on how to paint and how I painted that portrait, along with mixing. The whole class focuses on mixing skin tones, and so I really go into depth on how to do that. And if you go to my website, you can get like a half off the class if you go there through the link. It's only like $20, and I guarantee you, it is definitely worth more than $20. So the information alone, I think, would be a help. And again, I talk about mixing complements and how I go about mixing different skin tones for different ethnic groups. Whether you have dark skin, light skin, if you have more of an orange skin, more of a red skin, it's pretty comprehensive. So anyhow, take a look at it and see what you think, and I hope that helps out. But maybe sometime in the near future I might be able to do some workshops. If so, I will definitely post here on Facebook as well as on my website. But thank you so much.
Right, Diane had a question next.
Okay. Diane Reeves. Hey Diane, how are you? It says, thanks for taking our questions. Any chance you could post a sequence of images showing the drawing stage, block-in, blending, refining, and so forth? I do have some portraits that I can do that with. I will work on. I think I might be able to post after the session here is over. Later on, I think I might be able to post something either on in the comment section of this video, or else I will post something on Facebook that will show you the sequences that I go through in order to get to the final stage. But yes, definitely, I'll post something after the session. It might be today or tomorrow, but I'll definitely work on doing that. Thank you so much.
Okay, we got a quick.
Ryan Dupay. Hey, Ryan. I went to high school with Ryan, so it's good to see Ryan, and good to see you again, bud.
Okay, Charlotte had a question next.
Charlotte, thanks so much again for the question. It says, thanks so much for talking about developing the entire painting. Fascinating to hear you make the whole work by sometimes sacrificing one part. That is that's something that I don't think is really taught. This is more or less something that I learned from Joe Bowler, having studied under him. I started to realize that that there are certain areas of a painting that you can't get everything to be perfect, or you don't really want everything in a painting to be so perfect that it's everything is brought up to full detail. You sort of lose the spirit of especially in portraits when you do that. And so being able to sacrifice some things along the way is not a bad thing. So as long as you get the overall feeling and the character and the personality of your sitter, that's really what's important. So I hope that helps.
Okay, Kathy is next.
Kathy says, do you tone your canvas? I do not tone my canvas. What Kathy means by toning a canvas is simply instead of starting out with a white canvas, a lot of times artists will take a thin wash of one color, and they might put the whole wash over the entire canvas, and then start developing a more of a full scale painting using different values, but using that one color. In other words, a monochromatic painting. And then sometimes artists will cover the canvas with just one color, like either a brownish color or more of a gray color, a thin wash, and then they'll start to paint over top of that because they just don't like the starkness of a white canvas. I don't do that. That's just my own personal preference. I start out with a white canvas because I like the cleanness, the clean look, I guess, of the canvas. And whether it's actually true or not, I think it actually affects the overall color, because especially in thinner areas, if I'm painting in thinner areas, the white of that canvas underneath really helps to bring out more of a brilliance in the color itself. Not so much as you start to build up the paint in the opaque or the built-up colors that you can't see through. But no, I don't tone my canvases. I just use a white canvas, and that's another reason for using the...
Are we still live?
Okay, now we're back. Sorry, technical difficulties. As I was saying, that's a reason for using the white foam board underneath of the palette as well. If I was to work on a toned canvas, say if I worked on a gray toned canvas and I put a gray wash over the canvas, then I would probably use a gray piece of foam board or something gray underneath of my palette in order to properly judge and mix colors, if that helps out. But great question. Thank you so much.
Okay. Eric Dupay had a funny question there. Which you might
Eric
have to address
Dupay,
later.
what's the value scale that's used for the Banana Man expose? We'll have to talk about that later, Eric. He's talking about a play that I was in. That's the brother of Ryan. We went to high school together as well, so...
Save that question for later.
Yeah, we'll save that one for later. But Eric, thanks so much for joining me.
Nidai says thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. I hope this is a help. Really, this is for you guys. I get so many emails and questions. A lot of times I'm not able to answer them. So if you're one of the ones that have emailed me and you haven't received a response, it's not because I'm trying to ignore you. It's just for the fact that I just don't have the time to answer every one of them. So I just wanted to do this live Q&A to be able to more effectively and more quickly answer some of the questions as well. And then for those who aren't joining us live and are going to see this later, they sort of have a record. They can go back and take a look at it as well and maybe help to answer some of the questions that they might have. So,
okay, Sonia has a question.
Hey Sonia, thank you for joining us. How much time do you block out for a portrait? As far as during the day, I'm usually painting for at least 6 to 8 hours a day. So as far as working on one portrait, I try to switch it up so that I'm not working on just one painting at a time. In other words, I might start out working on one portrait in the morning or a study for one portrait in the morning and work on that for a couple of hours and then switch over to another painting. And the reason for that is because I find that the longer I work on a painting, the more used to the mistakes I get. In other words, I get used to seeing those mistakes because I'm constantly looking at it. And whereas if I would have just worked on it for a couple of hours and then just left it and come back to it another day, I probably would have made more progress on it. So it just gives me a fresh eye, being able to work on several things throughout the day. And not necessarily just one painting all the time. And one good way of, I will say this though, if I do need to work on a painting for an extended period of time, for whatever reason, if it's a deadline or if I just need to get more painting done on it, or if it's certain areas are going to dry, and I know that if I come back, I'm not going to be able to rework them like I could if they were wet. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll use a handheld mirror. Well, I was going to get it, and never mind, my mirror's down there. Anyhow, a handheld mirror that I will hold up, and I'll basically look at the handheld mirror and look at the reverse image in the mirror, and what that does is it gives me a fresh eye on the painting. It's almost like having another person come and look at it, because it's a totally new, fresh perspective. And that gives me a good eye on looking at it. And then there are times when I'll actually just turn the whole painting upside down and look at it that way, because I'm looking at more of the shapes and more of the values than I am trying to think of the person that I'm painting. So that's a long answer to your question, but I hope that helps. Yes,
Okay,
Jackie.
Allison has a question on painting teeth. What is your advice?
Any advice on painting teeth? Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you for the question. When it comes to painting teeth, the things that I would say are most important are to simplify. In other words, you don't necessarily have to paint every single tooth and all the gum in between the teeth, but you can paint it as more of a kind of like similar to the way that I would look at painting hair. You look at it as more of a mass or more of a whole rather than individual teeth. And one of the great, the great artists to look at are some of the old illustrators, the American illustrators. In particular, Haddon Sundblom is a great one to study. Tom Lovell, those two are really good. But Haddon Sundblom had a way of, he's the illustrator who did a lot of the Coca-Cola Santa Claus advertisements. And he pretty much kind of gave us the look of Santa Claus as we have it today through his illustrations. But Haddon Sundblom is a great one. He does an excellent job at simplifying, especially teeth, and simplifying highlights in hair. Even Sargent, John Singer Sargent is a great one to study. He didn't do too many with teeth, too many portraits. He did do them, which in portraiture is not really the most desirable way to paint a person, because after a while it tends to sort of wear on you after looking at a portrait with an open mouth. But Sargent, he didn't always go with what was thought to be the correct way of doing things when it came to portraits, and that's kind of what made him a pioneer and in many ways. But anyhow, simplification, I would say. And then also, another thing about painting teeth is a lot of times they are much darker in value than you would think. In other words, if you're painting white teeth on someone, you're not going to paint them with white straight out of the tube, because what happens is it makes the teeth look like they jump out at you. In other words, they come forward because of the stark contrast in value. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're painting teeth, is to a lot of times it's much darker and much deeper in value in order to get those teeth to look like they're actually in the mouth and set back. So I hope that helps.
Okay, Catherine had a question about reference photos.
Thank you, Catherine, for the question. It says, do you prefer photographs for your reference? Yes, I do. As far as when it comes to painting portraits, yes, because I can gather a lot of information very quickly, especially with children's portraits. It would be almost impossible, at least for me, to paint a child's portrait strictly from life. There were great painters like John Singer Sargent again, and Joaquin Sorolla. He was a Spanish painter. Some of the paintings that he came up with of children, he'd literally have children just run up and down the beach, and he would just paint them and end up with a beautiful painting after after a few hours of painting. And I have no idea how he did that. Whoops, excuse me. But no, I would definitely use photographs. Another good thing about using photographs is that I'm able to combine a lot of parts from different photographs. In other words, I can take maybe a hand from one and maybe a head from another, and come up with the best parts, I guess, from each photo in order to put them together to come up with the ideal painting that I'm looking for, and to try to convey that character and personality that I think best suits that person, that first impression again that I got when I first met them. So and then when I use photographs, I will do I'll get one regular exposure. I work from black and white photographs, and the reason I do is because I'm more interested in the values. A lot of times color photographs will throw you off, especially in colors like red tends to throw me off in color. It might appear lighter in value when it's actually darker in value when you convert it to a black and white image. So using black and white photographs is I've been doing that for ever since I started painting portraits, and it really I think it helps. It helps not only to see the value relationships, but allows me more of an opportunity to incorporate my own color into the painting. So I'll get one exposure that's just a regular exposure, and then I'll get one overexposure, which means it's lighter to be able to see into the shadows areas, and then I'll get one that's an underexposure so that I can see what's happening in the highlight areas of the face. So yes, I have no problems with working from photographs, but I will say this. I do not recommend. There's a right way and a wrong way to work from photographs. The way that I look at photographs is I'm viewing them as though I were painting from life. In other words, when I have the photograph in front of me, I'm still drawing. I'm still doing everything as though that person were in front of me. The danger comes if you project a photograph onto canvas. In other words, if you trace it, or if you throw it into a projector and you just simply trace off that photograph, because what you're doing is you're bypassing a lot of the foundation that goes into drawing. In other words, even if I'm working from photographs or if I'm working from life, when I look at a subject, what I'm doing is I'm training my eye to recognize values and shapes and actually seeing those things for myself. And that's really important, because if you can't see those things or train your eye to see those things, you're never really going to be effective in painting them, because you've never actually seen them. So being able to train your eye to see the important elements and to see those value changes and shapes in your subject, and then training your mind to take all of that information and to come up with a mental image, a simplified mental image that in your mind of all of this information and how you can most effectively put it onto canvas. So then you're training your eyes, you're training your mind, and then thirdly, you're training your hand to put down that mental image that you have in your mind. And so you're actually training your hand to, you're forcing your hand in a lot of ways to learn how to put down that picture that you have in your mind's eye in order to effectively communicate that message to the viewer. So all of that takes place when you're working from, whether you're working from photographs or from life, and you're looking at your subject and you're making those decisions. Now, if you simply project or you trace a picture onto your canvas, you're bypassing a lot of that. So in other words, you don't really have to see certain values and things like that. All you're doing is simply, you're just using your hand to trace everything. So your mind sort of takes a back seat. Your eye is not really working like it should, and you're really not training your hand to actually learn how to draw, because you're not actually taking those mental images that you have and trying to convey those yourself onto canvas, but you're just relying on simply tracing around a picture. And I've met many artists that have traced for years, and they've never really learned how to draw. And that plays a big part of it, because if you never really learn how to draw on your own, you're never really going to develop to your full potential as a painter or as an artist. You're never really going to get the results that you're looking for. So I definitely do not recommend tracing your photos, but rather just taking the photos and acting as though that person or that subject was right in front of you from life. So that's a long answer, but I hope it helps.
Okay, just a couple of comments before that. Compliments, and then the next question is from Dino about if you have a go-to oil medium. You see that one? I may have skipped some because my computer's
maybe. So do I have a medium that I use? Is that the question? Oh, here it is.
Go-to oil medium.
A go-to. Hey, Dino, how's it going? Good to see you. Thank you so much also for all of the kind comments that you put on my Facebook posts. It's greatly appreciated. So thank you so much. Do you have a go-to oil medium? The only medium that I use, and that's at the end of a portrait, is Liquin by Winsor & Newton. I think I've got it right here. It's just Liquin by Winsor & Newton. And the only time I really use this is at the end of a painting. If I want a very subtle change in value, maybe in a child's face, maybe especially like in a very soft transition on a cheekbone maybe. Very soft transition, I'll use Liquin. Or if I want a very subtle change in color temperature, if I want to introduce more color back into a shadow area, especially like a darker shadow, I might take the Liquin and then add more of a pure color with it, maybe pure orange, cad orange, or pure cad red or something like that, and then apply it to the canvas in more of a thin glaze, and then actually wipe it off either with a paper towel or take a dry brush and work it around so that it pretty much just produces a very thin glaze on top. If you're going to use this stuff, though, I definitely use a brush that you don't care about or that you can afford to lose, because once the Liquin gets in your brush, it's almost impossible to get all of it out. And what happens is you end up with a very stiff brush at the end, and it pretty much it really can't be used for anything else as far as painting with. So just be careful when you use this stuff. I do go into more depth as far as how I use this also on that Craftsy class. The painting realistic skin tones is what the title is. So and I demonstrate how I use that as well. But great question. Thank you so much.
Okay, looks like the next one is from Teresa.
Teresa, when and how do you apply final varnish to your customers' paintings? It's a great question. This is actually one it's quite a debate among a lot of artists as far as when do you varnish, how do you varnish, what do you use. Basically, when I finish a painting, I will put a thin coat of retouch varnish on my paintings, and it's the same type of varnish that I use throughout the painting process. In other words, as after I finish painting on a portrait for a day, a lot of times, especially when it comes to very dark areas of a painting, they tend to, what I would refer to as, sink into the canvas. In other words, they become more dull. And so in order to continue working on the painting and to properly judge the values from there on out, I have to get those dark areas especially, but all the values back to their original state. In other words, the way that I originally painted them. So in order to do that, I'll spray a thin coat of retouch varnish on there. And what that does is it just brings everything back up to full value. And then once that dries, it only takes a few minutes, then I'm able to go back in and start painting on that. So when I get to the end of a painting, I'll just simply put another coat of retouch varnish on there over the entire painting in order to bring everything back up to full value. And I'll either instruct the client on how to varnish a painting after about a year, or else if I'm going back, if I'm in the area, I'll stop by and I'll varnish the painting myself. But that's pretty much how I deal with varnishing. So everyone has their own opinion, but that's just the way that I do it. So, but great question. Thank you so much.
Okay, next is Susan. What time will you be doing this? A special day or hour, or did I just get lucky today?
Hey, Susan. I'm lucky you stopped by today. So I don't know. I don't know how many of these I'll be doing. This is actually the first time I've done this. So if you guys like the format, and if you like to ask questions like this, just let me know in the comments section, and I might do some more in the future. But it just seemed like an easier way for me to be able to answer a lot of questions very quickly. So give me your feedback, and if there's enough of a demand, then I may do some more in the future. So
okay.
Great question.
George has a question. Catherine Tucker said, thank you for such a thorough answer. George Molina, do you practice any life drawing? And if so, do you use charcoal?
Okay, so the question was, do you practice any life drawing, and if so, do you use charcoal or pastel or something else? I do some painting from life, not as much as I'd like to. Most of my day is spent working from photos a lot of times on portraits. But anytime that I do get a chance, yes, I do like to work from life. I think that painting from life is probably the most one of the most helpful tools one of the most helpful exercises that you can do as an artist. It helps you to advance much quicker. It helps you to actually understand how to paint from photographs a lot better as well, because with photographs you get a lot of sometimes you get distortion both in the drawing as well as in the color and the values, and so being able to paint from life and to recognize those distortions when you actually paint from photographs is definitely helpful. As far as working in charcoal or pastel, I do not. Whenever I do something from life, it's in oil paint. I just prefer to do oil. So the answer is no. I used to do a lot of pencil drawings. I used to draw a lot of the guys at college on my hall. I would do that, and that was fun. But when you're working with a dry medium like charcoal or pencil, a lot of times you're focusing a lot on lines. In other words, you're working to create a boundary, and you're finding those boundaries around your object. Whereas in painting, I'm doing a different type of drawing. It's what I would refer to as mass drawing. In other words, I'm using shapes and kind of putting shapes together, almost like a puzzle, in order to get a representation of the object that I'm painting. So it's just a different way of thinking, and it's probably why I work more and just primarily focus on oil. But great question. Thank you so much.
Okay, if you scroll down, Diane had a question as well.
Diane says, can you speak about placement of the head, composition, and about backgrounds, including shadows? Thanks. Good question. Thank you so much, Diane. The placement of the head. When it comes to a portrait, the head, at least in my opinion, has to be the center of attention. In other words, it has to be the focal point. Whether you place it higher or lower on the canvas, everything that is leading the viewer's eye into that head has to complement or has to help lead your viewer's eye in that direction. So if it's just a head and shoulders portrait, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's pretty much not in the center of the canvas, but kind of in the center, upper center of the canvas. As far as like a 3/4 view, of course the head might be higher on the higher 2/3 of the painting or higher third of the painting, but wherever you place the head, just keep in mind that everything else in the painting, all of the other elements, are actually working together to lead the viewer's eye to that head. Whether you have trees or branches behind the head, whether it's the way the light is falling on your subject or coming from behind your subject, everything leads towards the head. And again, that goes back to the subject of getting everything to work as a whole. So I think it's as far as placement goes, it's just much of that has to do with the surrounding background elements that lead into your subject. Let's see.
Barbara had a question regarding retouch varnish.
Let me get the second part here real quick.
Okay.
It says, Diane said, can you speak about the placement of the head, the composition, and the backgrounds? Okay, we kind of touched on that there. And then including shadows. The shadows are the same thing. If you look at every part of your painting as a design element, it really changes your perspective, not only on painting portraits, but on painting any subject that you have. So Rembrandt is a great example, how he used light and shadow to direct the viewer's eye to where he wanted it to go. You can do the same thing with the shadows in your painting. You can get maybe have a shadow behind in the background, and then to set the head off, to bring it forward more, it might be more of a contrast. If you don't want as much of a contrast, you could create more of a similar value that leads into the head. It depends on what you're looking for, but the shadows, whether it's shadows, even color, you can use as a design element. You can have more of the pure colors, in other words, less saturated, not as gray, leading in towards the head. But if you look at everything as a design element, whether it's drawing, value, color, edges, they all work together in order to lead the viewer's eye towards the head. So to sum it all up, I guess I would say that you're trying to lead the viewer's eye towards that head and get them to recognize that head very quickly. And then that's usually why I bring up the amount of finish in a head a lot more than I would background elements, because that's really what I want the viewer to focus on. So I hope that helps. Thank you so much. That was a great question.
Okay, Barbara had a question. Barbara, I think Palucci. Regarding the retouch varnish, do you spray at the end of your session or when you resume painting on it? And what is the name of the retouch varnish?
Great question. Thank you so much. Oops, let me bear with me here. I have the retouch varnish right here. Again, this is Winsor Newton retouch varnish. I think I use just about every Winsor Newton product there is. I just love Winsor Newton. They're really good. I've used their paints for over 20 years. They're very consistent, so I really like it. I've used the retouch varnish for probably about the same amount of time. So it's just Winsor Newton retouch varnish, and I spray it on the following day or when the painting is dry to the touch. In other words, don't spray it on when the paint is still wet, or even if it's tacky. I would wait until it's dry. A lot of times those darker colors tend to dry. It doesn't take a whole lot of time for them to dry, but they may take a little bit longer to dry than the lighter colors. I find that the more white that you add to a color, usually the faster it tends to dry for some reason. So, but to answer your question, I would wait until the painting is dry to the touch, and then go ahead and spray some retouch varnish on there. And that brings everything back up to full value. So, hope that helps.
Okay, next question is Diane Reeves. That she loves this format, and would you be open to offering comments and suggestions about portraits we may be struggling with? Perhaps one or two per live video. We could send them to you via email or Facebook.
That's a good question. As far as being able to offer suggestions about portraits, it's almost like a critique, and there's a lot that goes into a critique, and so I don't think I'd be able to do that, just for the fact that a good critique isn't just someone's opinion of a particular work of art. A good critique, in my in my way of thinking, is that it should show an artist, point out the things, the strengths that they have and what they're doing right, but then also offer some suggestions, some very direct suggestions that would immediately help them out in areas that they could probably improve on. And so in order to do that, it takes a lot, at least for me it does, it takes a lot to be able to look at a work of art and then to evaluate it and find out really what needs to be, or what could be done in order to make it more effective. And so to me, that's probably, I have done those before, but it's very time consuming, and that's really, again, the reason that I don't do those. But so right now I'm not able to do that, but maybe in the future, I've had people that have asked about critiques. It might be something that I might offer on my website, for a fee or something, but it takes, there's a lot that goes into it. So at this time I wouldn't be able to. So I know that's probably not the answer you want, but
good question.
Anyhow, but yes, it is a good question. Thank you.
Okay, so next is Kyle Durr, I think a friend from college. You can scroll down.
Hey Kyle, how's it going? Good to see you.
Looks like he has one of those pencil drawings you did in college.
Kyle is actually one of the guys that I was talking about drawing the guys on my down at college on my hall. That Kyle is one of the guys that I drew, and so he has one of those pencil drawings, and I'm surprised he still has it. So
Kyle, post a picture of it.
Yeah, Kyle, if you still have it, post a
comments.
picture. My younger days. So
as a college student.
I'm gonna take. I will take. I think 2 more questions here, and then I think we're gonna wrap up.
Okay, so Kate Pierce asked, "Is there any particular part of a portrait that is more difficult, such as the eyes or mouth? I read that Sargent said a portrait is a painting in which there is always something wrong with the mouth."
Sargent was right. As far as when it comes to painting portraits, I would definitely say that the mouth is the most difficult. The reason is because there's no bone structure really in that mouth. When you're painting the lips, everything is they're just subtle muscles, and so a very slight upturn in the corner of a mouth can totally change the attitude or the look of a person. The mouth tells so much. I would say the mouth tells more than the eyes do in a portrait. And painting a good mouth is not always an easy task, but one that I would definitely pay close attention to if you're painting commission portraits. Don't just assume that the eyes are going to tell the story and then kind of let the mouth take a back seat. I would definitely focus a lot of attention on the mouth. And what's amazing about painting a mouth is that it doesn't have to be overly detailed. In fact, a lot of times, one of the things that I've learned from looking at Sargent's paintings, you'll notice a lot of times the mouths that he paints, it's basically almost just a shape, or not, I won't say a blob, but it's a shape in the middle here. And then all there is are little accent marks on the outside corners of the eye, and then maybe one in the middle, and that's pretty much it. But what he's done in those middle values, in order to create an environment for those dark accents, is really where all the work took place. But even though it looks simple, because Sargent has a way of making things look very simple that are not simple to paint, but I would definitely say that the mouth is definitely the most difficult to paint, at least in my own experience. All right, and then the last question here.
I think we got the last question on live, so if you want to just do one more question.
Okay, I will take one more question from the ones that I got earlier. Let's see, what would be a good one? Here's one from Wheezy Scott. She says, "I would love to paint portraits in watercolor. Where do I start?" My advice, whether you're painting in watercolor or oil or even pastel, it doesn't matter, acrylics, it really doesn't matter what medium that you're using. If you're wanting to paint representational art, in other words, if you're wanting to paint things that look or mimic the way that we see things in nature, then I would definitely start by learning the foundational principles that really make up and govern every decision that an artist makes during the portrait process. So those principles are simply the ones that I talk about all the time: drawing, value, color, and edges. If you can learn about how each one of those work individually, you'll gain a lot, not only a lot of knowledge, head knowledge, but you'll gain more of an understanding of how to apply those individual principles to your own art. Once you've learned those principles individually, the next step I would say is to learn how they all work together. In other words, it's almost like having a car. You have 4 wheels on a car, let's say drawing, value, color, and edges. Each one of those wheels will has its own purpose and will hold up the foundation, but in order to get the car to move and to do what you want it to and to go where you want it to go, they all have to be working together. And so really learning how each one of those principles works together, I think is an important step, whether you're working in watercolor or in oil paint. The only difference when you're working in watercolor, it's almost a reverse of the way that I work, in a reverse approach almost when it comes to values, in the way that I work in oil. In oil, I'm working from my dark values up to my lighter values. In other words, I'm saving my really light values till the end of a portrait, usually like those highlights. Whereas in watercolor, a lot of times you're, because of the nature of the medium itself, a lot of times you're working from lighter to darker, and you're adding those dark accents in later on. So that would be the difference. But as far as the principles go, that it would apply to no matter what medium you're using. I will mention this. When it comes to watercolor paintings, there is a great watercolorist whose work I really admire. Mary White is her name. If you ever get a chance to see her work or look it up online, I think it'll really help you. If you're a watercolorist, I think that she shows what's possible in watercolor. One of the things that distinguishes her work, I think, from most watercolorists is that she's not afraid to go deep in value when it comes to those darks, and I think that's what gives her paintings more volume, or more three-dimensional, more of a three-dimensional quality to them. But Mary White is her name. She's a great one to study when it comes to watercolor. Even if you're looking for a great painter of the past, Anders Zorn, he did some phenomenal watercolors. He was skilled in watercolor, oil painting, and sculpture. He was sort of a Renaissance artist all the way around. But anyhow, I hope that that this has helped. And even though I'm not able to get to all of your questions today, hopefully I'll be able to do another one of these in the near future. If you guys are interested in doing something like this again, just let me know, and I will be I'll be open to it. So I hope that this has been a help to you. And again, if you want more information about anything that I've talked about, you can always replay the video itself. But a lot of what I talk about when it comes to the principles of painting are either on my blog, on my website, or the videos that I've posted on YouTube as well. And you can find all of that at my website at brianneher.com. So I hope that this helps. And also, I think that if you guys want to, I think there should be a follow button on the video somewhere near the bottom. If there is, you can hit follow, and anytime that I go live, you should get a notification. So
they can also share the video for others.
Yes, my wife just that's why I have her here. She can multitask much better than I can. But she just reminded me that if you want to share the video as well, feel free to do that. And again, thank you guys so much for all of your encouragement on Facebook and all of the questions that you've sent to me. And I hope to be able to answer them eventually in the future as well. But take care, and I wish you guys all the best in your art. And I look forward to seeing you next time.